The 6-year-old girl lay crumpled in the corner of the storage room, her small fingers locked around a threadbare teddy bear. Its button eye dangled by a thread, just as fragile as the child who clung to it. Her knees were scraped, her lips split, and a bruise was spreading across her temple like spilled ink. She shivered against the concrete wall, the air sharp with mildew and the metallic stench of rust. Somewhere above, the storm wailed, wind battering broken shutters until they clanged like chains in a dungeon. Her name was Emily, though no one had spoken it with tenderness in months. The only words she remembered from earlier that night were the ones hissed through clenched teeth. "Stay here!" "Don't make a sound." Then the door had slammed, the padlock snapped shut, and she was alone except for the bear pressed to her chest and the pounding of her frightened heart. She didn't know how long she had been there when the thunder rolled again, louder this time, shaking dust from the rafters. Emily whimpered and pulled the teddy closer. The storm outside wasn't the only thing she feared. What waited when the door reopened was worse. Her stepfather's eyes, the fists, the words, and yet, through the roar of the storm, came another sound, heavy boots crunching gravel, a low growl that was not thunder. Emily froze, holding her breath. The growl deepened, steady, controlled. It wasn't a monster, it was a dog. The lock rattled, then a sharp crack, metals snapping. The door creaked open and lightning backlit the frame, turning the figure there into a silhouette. Broad shoulders, soaked combat jacket, rifle slung but lowered. Beside him, the shadow of a German shepherd pressed close, head lifted, ears pricked forward. The dog growled again, not at Emily, but at the darkness behind her, as if sensing ghosts. "Clear," the soldier murmured, his voice gravelly, worn. The shepherd obeyed, padding forward, paws silent against the damp concrete. Its nose twitched, sniffing the corners, before the amber eyes locked onto Emily. She whimpered and shrank tighter into herself. But the dog didn't lunge, didn't bark. Instead, it lowered its head, tail sweeping once across the ground, and inched closer, as though asking permission. "Easy, Shadow," the soldier said. His eyes adjusted to the dark, finding the child curled like a wounded bird. He knelt, movement slow. A scar ran from his temple to his jawline, stark in the flash of lightning, and his hands trembled slightly, betraying the war he carried inside. Emily's gaze darted from the man to the dog. She didn't trust men, but dogs. Dogs had never lied to her. The shepherd stopped just short, sat down, and tilted its head. Emily's tears broke free, spilling silently down her dirty cheeks. Her tiny hand crept from the teddy bear and brushed the dog's fur. The soldier let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For weeks he had walked through this storm-battered town, trying to outrun his own memories. The K9 had been his only anchor, the one piece of the battlefield he had brought home. And now, somehow, that anchor had found this girl. "My name's Daniel," he said softly. His voice cracked. He wasn't used to speaking gently. "This is Shadow. He won't hurt you. Neither will I." Emily flinched at his words, hugging the teddy bear again. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Shadow leaned forward and licked the blood at the corner of her mouth with the gentlest touch. Emily's eyes widened. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe she wasn't completely invisible. Another boom of thunder jolted the soldier. His heart raced. In his mind it wasn't thunder, it was mortars exploding dirt, comrades falling. His breath came short, chest tight. He closed his eyes, forced himself back. Not the desert, not the war, the girl. Focus on the girl. He opened his eyes. Emily was staring at him, frightened by his silence. He nodded once, steadying himself. "We need to get you out of here." "It's not safe. The word meant nothing to Emily anymore, but Shadow pressed closer, and she found herself rising shakily to her feet. Her legs wobbled, but the shepherd nudged beneath her arm, steadying her like a crutch. She let him. Daniel reached to help, but she recoiled instantly, clutching the teddy like a shield. His hand froze mid-air, then dropped back. He understood. He had recoiled from hands too, once upon a time, long before he learned to fight. The storm howled through the open doorway. Daniel glanced out. Something wasn't right. He had seen tracks leading here, heavy boots, 2 men, maybe 3, and he knew the kind of men who locked children away. "We need to move," he said. He tried to sound firm, not frightening. "Shadow will guide you. I'll cover us." Emily followed the dog, her tiny fingers buried in its fur. Daniel brought up the rear, rifle low, scanning shadows. The storm drenched them instantly as they stepped outside. Water pooled across the dirt road and lightning carved the sky. Halfway across the yard, Shadow stiffened. His growl rolled like thunder itself. Daniel swung the rifle. A figure lurked at the tree line watching, then another. Emily whimpered and pressed into Shadow's side. "Go!" Daniel hissed, ushering them toward the truck parked nearby. His chest tightened again, memories colliding with reality. Gunfire, shouts, his team going down, his fault, all of it. He shook his head. Not now, not again. They reached the truck just as lightning revealed a man stepping forward. Emily gasped. Even through the sheets of rain she knew that face, the stepfather. Daniel raised the rifle. Shadow barked once, sharp, commanding. The man froze, but his voice slithered across the storm. "That's mine." The girl. "She belongs to me." Emily buried her face in the dog's fur. Her voice came out in the tiniest broken whisper, barely audible, but it struck harder than any thunder. "They left us here," she said. "Don't let him take me back." The storm raged. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He met Shadow's eyes, and the dog bristled, ready to fight. And in that moment, Daniel knew. Neither he nor the K9 would leave her side. The rain poured in sheets, blurring the lines between sky and earth. Emily clung to Shadow's fur, her knuckles white, the teddy bear still crushed in her other hand. Every time thunder rolled, she flinched, but the dog stood firm, a steady wall between her and the man who had locked her away. Daniel leveled his rifle. The stepfather's face glistened with rain, but the cruelty in his eyes burned clear. "She's mine," the man snarled. "Get your damn mutt out of the way. You don't know who you're dealing with." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't lower the weapon. "The only thing I know is that no child should be left in a room like that. You want her? You go through me and him." He gestured slightly with his chin toward Shadow. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the men behind the stepfather. 2 shapes, large, their posture predatory. Daniel's pulse quickened. 3 men, 1 girl, 1 dog, and him. His training screamed to calculate distance, cover, angles, but his other battle screamed louder. The sound of the storm was no longer a storm, it was artillery. The rain was sand clinging to his skin, the shouts of enemy fire closing in. He blinked hard. "Focus! Present! Protect! Emily," he said, his voice tight but steady. "Stay close to Shadow. No matter what happens," the stepfather sneered. "You don't get it. She's money, a paycheck. Military benefits don't just land in a child's lap. They go through me, and I'm not about to let my little investment walk away." Daniel's stomach turned. He'd heard of men like this before, parasites feeding off the dead. Benefits from a soldier's death twisted into chains for the family left behind. And now it was staring him in the face. Shadow's growl deepened. His fur bristled as he stepped forward, teeth flashing white. The stepfather raised a hand. "Take her!" One of the men lunged. Shadow exploded, a blur of fur and muscle colliding with the attacker. The man went down hard, screaming as the dog's jaws locked on his arm. Emily shrieked but didn't run. Daniel pulled her behind him, pressing her small body against the truck's frame. The second man charged. Daniel squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, deafening in the storm. A warning shot hit the mud at the man's feet, splattering him with dirt. He stumbled back, startled. "You've got 1 chance," Daniel barked, his voice like steel. "Back off." The men hesitated, eyes darting between Shadow's unrelenting attack and Daniel's unwavering aim. But the stepfather just laughed. "You think this ends here? You're nothing but a broken soldier clinging to a dog. You can't save her. Nobody can. Daniel's finger twitched on the trigger. The urge to silence that voice burned in him, but Emily's sob caught his ear. He forced his breath slow. Not like before, not the mistakes overseas. He wasn't here to take life, he was here to protect it. "Shadow, release!" The shepherd obeyed instantly, backing off but standing guard, his teeth still bared. The man scrambled away, clutching his shredded arm. "Get in the truck," Daniel ordered. Emily hesitated only a second before scrambling into the passenger seat, Shadow leaping in after her. Daniel swung into the driver's seat, turning the key. The engine roared. Tires spun mud and gravel as the truck lurched forward. In the mirror, the stepfather stood in the storm, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. His face twisted with rage, and though his lips moved, the words were drowned by the thunder. But Daniel could read them anyway. "I'll find you." The truck barreled down the flooded road, headlights slicing through curtains of rain. Emily sat rigid, her teddy still clutched against her chest, Shadow pressed tight against her side. Daniel gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. The silence in the cab was heavier than the storm outside. Emily's breathing came in hiccups. Daniel wanted to say something, anything to ease the terror in her eyes. But words had never been his strength. The war had stripped them from him, left only commands, shouts, broken prayers. Finally, he asked softly, "Do you have a name?" She didn't answer, only hugged the teddy tighter. Shadow whined, nudging her hand. After a long moment, she whispered, "Emily." Daniel nodded once, keeping his eyes on the road. "Emily, good. You're safe now," but the word safe felt hollow even to him. He knew the storm outside wasn't the real danger. The stepfather had connections. Men like that always did. The kind who could twist a story, sway a town, bury a truth. He needed help. Someone who wouldn't look away. Someone who wouldn't say it's not my place. A memory surfaced. An old friend from the service, now a caseworker named Claire Reynolds. She had once told him, "If you ever see a child in trouble, don't hesitate. Call me." He hadn't spoken to her in years, but maybe fate had put that card back in his hand. The truck skidded around a bend, nearly fishtailing. Emily gasped, clutching Shadow's neck. Daniel steadied the wheel, heart pounding. "Stay sharp. Focus. She's counting on you." A new sound cut through the storm. An engine. Headlights flared in the mirror. A black SUV gaining fast. Daniel cursed under his breath. Of course they'd follow. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. "Hold on!" he barked, slamming the accelerator. The truck surged forward, but the road was slick, treacherous. The SUV closed the gap, lights glaring. Emily's small voice trembled. "They're coming!" Daniel's mind raced. Options, choices. Every wrong one meant Emily back in that room. He couldn't let that happen. He gritted his teeth, memories of convoy ambushes flashing behind his eyes. Different country, same damn chase. But this time, he wasn't leaving anyone behind. The SUV rammed the back bumper. Metal screeched, Emily screamed. Shadow barked, lunging at the window. Daniel fought the wheel, the truck swerving. A bridge loomed ahead, slick with rainwater, its guardrails old and bent. One wrong move and they'd plunge into the river below. The SUV rammed them again. Daniel slammed the brakes, letting the truck jolt backward into the enemy vehicle. Metal crunched. The SUV swerved, fishtailing dangerously close to the bridge's edge. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought they'd go over, but the SUV recovered, tires screeching, and surged forward again. Emily clutched Shadow, tears streaming. "Don't let them take me back!" Daniel's jaws set. His voice came out like a vow. "They won't." He yanked the wheel, the truck swerving toward the narrow service road leading into the forest. Mud splashed high as they skidded off the main road, headlights bouncing over roots and rocks. The SUV followed, but the forest closed in quickly, branches scraping metal, the path narrowing. Daniel knew the terrain would favor him, favor Shadow. The forest was chaos, but chaos was where soldiers survived. And as the storm swallowed them deeper into the trees, Emily whispered again, voice trembling but fierce with desperate hope. "Please, don't leave me." Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, the words cutting into him like shrapnel. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He already knew the truth. He wasn't just fighting for her life. He was fighting for his own redemption. The service road choked into roots and runoff, and Daniel fought the wheel until the mud won. The truck fishtailed, skidded sideways, and thudded nose-first into a rain-swollen ditch. The engine coughed, shuddered, and died. "Out," Daniel said, already moving. He shouldered the door against the flood and lifted Emily down, but she wriggled away from his hands and went straight to Shadow. The shepherd pressed against her legs, taking her weight as another sheet of rain slashed through the trees. Behind them, the black SUV punched the corner of the bend and slewed to a stop, headlights throwing hard white spears between trunks. Doors opened. Voices. Too many. Daniel grabbed his go-bag and rifle, eyes flitting across the forest like he could will it into a map. He didn't need a map. He had Shadow. "Track," he breathed. Shadow's nose cut the storm, a dark blade slicing scent from chaos. He huffed once, then bolted upslope along a game trail, tail low, deliberate. Daniel put Emily between them, his hand hovering an inch from her shoulder but never touching. She clutched her teddy so tight he heard the stitches complain. They climbed, the ground slick and treacherous. Emily slipped and would have gone sliding if Shadow hadn't braced, letting her handful of wet fur be a rope. Daniel's breath tore in his chest. Thunder cracked so close the forest flashed white, and in the instant of blindness he was back in it, the alley in Kandahar, a door blown inward, dust like ash in his teeth, his sergeant's voice somewhere under the ringing. For a second his legs forgot the present. A small weight bumped his hip. Emily. She didn't speak, just bumped him again, and his body remembered the now. He nodded once, a gesture that was half apology, half thanks, and kept moving. They cut across the spine of the ridge until the ground dropped again toward water. The river roared fat and brown below, shouldering fallen limbs and whole trunks. To their left, a culvert's black mouth yawned where the water tunneled under the old logging road. Shadow stopped hard and looked back, eyes burning like coals in the rain. He pawed the ground, then the culvert mouth, then looked over his shoulder once more, as if to say, "This way if you want to live." Daniel didn't like tight spaces. His chest already burned with the thought of the roof collapsing, water closing above him, the sound of concrete shearing like bone. He looked at Emily, soaked through, lips blue. He didn't get to dislike tight spaces tonight. He crouched, slid in, and Shadow went next, Emily crawling between them, belly and knees in cold river mud. Water slapped at their hands. Overhead, boots clattered onto the road, lights swung, a voice swore. Another laughed. They huddled in the culvert's throat, thunder stomping down the valley. Shadow's flank pressed Emily's shoulder. Daniel listened to the men's voices smear into the storm, counting heartbeats until the beam of a flashlight stalled on the ditch where the truck lay nose down. "They ditched it!" someone shouted. "Spread out!" Daniel leaned close to Emily, his lips almost touching her ear. "We're going to move when the lights go," he whispered. "Shadow's with you. Keep your belly low and don't let go of him. I'll be right behind you." She nodded. The teddy squeezed against her chest. The bear's button eye dragged against her collarbone. The loose thread tickled her throat. She pressed her mouth to its matted head like a prayer. When the flashlight beams swung toward the far bank, Daniel tapped Shadow once. The shepherd slid forward, silent as thought. Emily followed, inches at a time, her breath ragged but quiet. Daniel moved last, hands and knees numb, rifle cradled against the filth. Twice the current rose and slapped his face, and twice he told his heart not to sprint, not the alley, not the war, pipe, water, girl, dog, now. They spilled out on the far side into blackberry and alder thickets that snatched at their clothes. Shadow threaded a seam through the bramble, and Daniel proofed every footfall for Emily with his hands before she placed her feet. The SUV's voices blurred into distance. The storm pinned the world down with noise. Half an hour later, an hour, the ridge spit them into a narrow swale where a shuttered fire lookout crouched on cinder blocks, tin roof vibrating to the rain. It was one of those half-forgotten places that belonged to no one and everyone, a table, a cot frame, a rusted first aid box nailed to a post. A no-smoking sign hung crooked over a cold wood stove. Daniel shouldered the door, and it scraped over swollen planks. He swept the corners, checked the windows, and turned back to guide Emily inside. He was already cataloguing: field dressings, stove they wouldn't light, a crusted lantern they wouldn't risk. The roof leaked in a clean line at the back. Good. Clean water. Shadow shook himself, rain exploding off him in a halo. Emily flinched and then half laughed, startled by the spray, and then looked ashamed for laughing at all. Daniel pretended not to notice. He cracked the first aid tin and found gauze and antiseptic packets that had gone hard at the corners. It would do. "Let me see," he said gently, pointing to the split on her lip and the purpled knot at her temple. She hesitated and then sat on the edge of the cot frame. Shadow put his head on her knee and watched Daniel like a supervisor. Daniel washed his hands with a bottled inch of rainwater, tore open antiseptic, and dabbed with a steadiness that surprised him. "You said he left you there," Daniel said, voice level. Has he done this before?" Emily's eyes went somewhere inside herself where the room couldn't follow. "Sometimes he's nice when people look," she said. "He buys me ice cream. He tells them I'm quiet. When they don't look, he says Daddy was a traitor, and that's why we have to be sorry all the time." Daniel's jaw knotted. He taped a butterfly bandage across the cut. "What was your father's name, Emily?" She swallowed. "Sergeant Michael Hart." She said the name slow, like she was borrowing it and might break it. The room tilted a degree. Daniel sat back on his heels. The name struck a hidden bell in him he hadn't known still hung. Hart. A tent lit from within. The smell of instant coffee and gun oil. A laugh like gravel. A hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You did what you could, kid." Emily's teddy creaked in her arms as she hugged it closer. The loose button eye wobbled, and the thread, finally, surrendered. The button popped and tumbled onto the boards. Emily made a small sound like air escaping a paper bag. "I can fix that," Daniel said quickly. "We'll find a new thread." She looked down at the place where the button had been. The stitch line had always been crooked there, puckered, as if someone had closed a wound in a hurry. Now, with the button gone, the seam gaped enough to show a flash of something that wasn't stuffing. "Paper? Metal?" Daniel's breath hitched. "Emily, may I?" She hesitated, then handed the bear over like a ceremony. Daniel slit the old seam with a pocket blade as gently as he would a suture. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay a folded photograph and something small and hard that clinked against his blade. He lifted them out like they might shatter. The photo was sunburnt by time, its edges dog-eared. 3 men in fatigues leaned against a sandbag wall. One of them was Michael Hart, young but already carrying gravity in his stance. On his right stood a taller man with a hawk's nose and a grin that didn't quite make it to his eyes. On Hart's left, with a regulation haircut and ears too big for his head, stood Daniel Hale. He forgot to breathe. The room went very quiet, though the storm still beat its fists on the roof. There was writing on the back, pressed hard, the letters a field scrawl. "If anything happens, find Daniel Hale. He will know what to do." The small, hard thing was a key, a thin, old-fashioned one, stamped with a number and a tiny anchor insignia he hadn't seen in years. Not an anchor, look again, not navy. The outline of a county courthouse, stylized, the stamp of a safe deposit box from a small-town bank chain that used the courthouse silhouette in its logo. He recognized it with the weird clarity of certain memories, a branch on Franklin Street, 2 blocks from the square. The world shifted a click. The storm was still happening. The men might still be combing the other side of the ridge, but something else had stepped into the room. The invisible line that ran from a dusty forward operating base to this leaky cabin, from a man who had died, believing his daughter would find a future, to the soldier who had stumbled through tonight on the fumes of penance. Emily stared at the photograph. Then, at Daniel's face. You knew my dad?" she whispered. Daniel's throat went tight. He nodded once. "He was my team leader," he said. "He saved my life." More than once her fingers tightened around the bear's limp arm. "He isn't a traitor." "No." Daniel's voice had gravel in it, and something warmer. "He was the kind of man other men follow in the dark." For the first time since he had met her, Emily's shoulders loosened a fraction. She looked very small and very old all at once. "He told me," she said, eyes on the torn seam, "that if I was ever lost, I should hold the bear tight and listen for footsteps." "What footsteps?" Daniel asked. "Good ones," she whispered. "Ones that stop where you are." Shadow huffed, as if in agreement, and then, in the same breath, every muscle in his body sprang wire-taut. His ears pricked, his head swung toward the door. A low thunder, not from the sky this time, rolled up from his chest. Daniel moved without thinking. He slid Emily off the cot frame and behind the wood stove, set the photo and key in the pocket over his heart, and crouched with the rifle angled toward the door. A light swept the window, paused, then slid away. Voices closer than they had any right to be, the crunch of boots on wet needles, the squeal of a radio turned low. "Copy. Look out on the swale. Eyes on the mutt's prints." The doorknob turned once. Testing. Patient. Emily's breath brushed Daniel's sleeve. Her hand crept down and found Shadow's ruff, anchoring herself to the one thing in the room that didn't shake. From outside, a new voice joined the others, jovial and blandly authoritative. "Evening, folks," it called. "Sheriff's Department. Little trouble with the weather. You all right in there?" Daniel closed his eyes for the length of a blink. He had spent enough years listening for tone to know when something was off. The cheer was painted on like a billboard. Under it was a different color entirely. Shadow's growl slid lower, a warning bell under the floorboards. Emily leaned close, her mouth a ghost at his ear. "That voice," she said, so softly he barely heard it. "He's friends with the man who locked me in the room." The doorknob turned again, this time with a click of metal on metal, and the silhouette of a pry bar rose in the window's reflection. The pry bar's silhouette hung in the rain-smeared window like a crooked finger. The doorknob jerked, metal rasping on swollen wood. Shadow's growl thickened until it vibrated through the cot frame into Emily's bones. "Sheriff's Department," the cheerful voice called again, closer now, right on the porch. "No need for anyone to get spooked. We'll just take a quick look. Little girl inside, you come on out. Sugar." Emily moved even closer to Shadow until her cheek pressed his neck. Daniel could feel the tremor in her shoulders through the sleeve of his jacket. "Back away from the door," another man barked. This one didn't bother with friendly. Daniel's mind ticked. One door, two windows, one room, tin roof, bad cover, no power, no stove fire. He could hold them for 30 seconds, maybe, but that ended with muzzle flashes and Emily learning a new shape of fear. He glanced at the photo and key in his chest pocket, then to the corner where rain guttered through a clean leak into a tin pail. The pail. The roof. The corner seam where the wall met floor had a dark crack. Rot. "Emily," he whispered, "remember how Shadow finds seams in the brambles?" She nodded. "Good. We're going to find one in this room. Stay with him." He slid the cot frame aside, braced his boots, and shouldered into the softened plank seam. Wood complained, then gave. The pry bar hit the door hard and the jamb split an inch. Voices rose. Daniel shoved once more. A narrow crawl space opened under the wall into the wet grass beyond, just wide enough for a child and a dog. "Shadow," he breathed, tapping the floor. The shepherd sank low and snaked through, tail vanishing under the siding. Daniel angled Emily's shoulders down, hands out, elbows tucked. "He'll pull. I'll be right behind." She swallowed, pressed the teddy to her chest, and slid forward. A pair of paws hooked her jacket and drew her out into the rain dark. The door shuddered again. A screw squealed. Daniel slung the rifle, grabbed his go-bag, and squeezed after them, ribs scraping wood. Halfway through, the door burst. Boots hit the floorboards behind him. A flashlight cut the room open, light searing down to the ragged hole where his legs still stuck out. "There!" someone shouted. A shot cracked. Splinters snapped against his calves. Daniel hauled himself free, rolled, and came up on one knee in ankle-high ferns, shoving Emily and Shadow toward the backside of the shack. "Go!" he hissed. They ran bent double, hugging the building's shadow line as men poured through the front. A face lunged around the corner, close enough Daniel saw the rain beading on the man's eyelashes. Shadow hit low, teeth flashing. The man went down with a curse, his pistol barking skyward when it slammed the boards. Daniel shouldered past, scooped the gun with his boot, and kicked it under the shack. "Release!" he snapped. Shadow let go and backed, growling. The man clutched his forearm, eyes wide at the blood and the dog. "Stop!" A new figure stepped into the edge of the shack's light wash, slicker flapping. Sheriff Harlan Briggs, barrel-chested and ruddy, a politician's grin struggling with a brawler's instincts. His badge flashed like a coin. "Easy there, hero." Hand the girl over. "This is a custody matter, not a war zone." Daniel drew air slow. The rain ran in rivulets off his jaw. "You tried the door with a pry bar," he said. Briggs chuckled. "Storm's got folks skittish. We needed to make sure no one was hurt." Emily's fingers tightened in Shadow's ruff. "He knows the man," she whispered. "He brings him around." Daniel's knuckles whitened around the rifle. He shifted his body half an inch more in front of Emily. "Then you know this is wrong." He pitched his voice low, steady. "I'm calling CPS now." Briggs's eyes cooled. "You do that. Meanwhile, you're obstructing an officer. Don't make this worse on yourself, soldier." The word hit harder than the rain. Soldier. Daniel saw mortar blossoms where lightning bloomed. He heard men he couldn't bring back in the way Briggs's vowels stretched. He swallowed the memory down like a hot coin and felt the weight of a different word. Guardian. It wasn't his title, but it was true. "Move!" Briggs said to his men, hand lifting. "Smoke," Daniel whispered. Shadows surged past Emily, pivoted, and slammed his bulk into the dangling metal pail. The water burst across the floor and up into the lantern the men had just lit inside. The room coughed steam and smoke. Men cursed. In the same breath, Daniel grabbed a rusted shovel from the shack wall and slammed it into the hanging gutter. The tin pipe sheared and crashed down like a drawn curtain. For 3 blinks, the world became white noise and confusion. "Go!" Daniel growled. They sprinted into the trees. A shot popped. Daniel felt air tug his sleeve. Another shot and Shadow barked, a sharp yelp clipping the end. Emily stumbled, whirled, and in that fraction of a second Daniel saw blood stripe the shepherd's hindquarter. "No," she gasped, reaching. "Shadow, heel!" Daniel commanded, voice like a command wire. The dog limped to Emily's side, shoulder to her knee, still moving. Daniel cut across the slope, choosing rocks and roots instead of leaf loam, harder footprints to follow. Behind them, Briggs's men howled through the underbrush. They climbed until the forest changed from cut-over scrub to older pine. The storm softened under the needles, trading slap for hiss. Daniel breathed through the fire in his chest and the animal staccato of Shadow's breaths. Emily's steps dragged. He hit his knees by a fallen log and pulled the first aid roll. "Hold him," he told Emily. She knelt, both hands on Shadow's neck. The dog's eyes flicked to Daniel, alert and apologetic. The graze was a strip of angry red along the flank, fur burned away, skin parted but not deep. Daniel gritted his teeth against the way his hands wanted to shake. Gauze, antiseptic, wrap. He talked low while he worked, not for Shadow, who already understood, but for the child who needed to hear a voice that didn't lie. "You're good, buddy." "You did perfect." "You keep her with you and I'll keep this bandage clean." "Deal?" Shadow huffed once, the same clipped syllable he used for copy. Daniel secured the wrap. Emily's small fingers shook as she touched the white bandage. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the dog, and Shadow licked the salt from her wrist. "Up," Daniel said, softer now. "We need a road." "And a phone." They found both where the forest thinned into a logging spur that bowed toward a county blacktop. A diner squatted at the curve, lights dead, an open sign dangling in the window like a joke. But under the porch, salvation from another decade, a payphone beat the rain. Daniel dropped Emily and Shadow into the shadows of a stack of propane tanks and stepped to the phone, keeping the receiver low. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years and prayed it hadn't changed. It rang once. "Claire Reynolds," a woman answered, voice clipped, alert, midnight, and ready. "Claire," Daniel said. The sound of her name surprised him with a warmth he had not expected. "It's Hale." A beat, paper rustled. "Daniel?" The question carried the weight of a decade and zero hesitation. "Where are you?" "County line, child in danger, stepdad's name, Roy Carson, sheriff's playing doorman." He watched the road, the tree line, the dark cloud of the ridge. "Girl's 6, name Emily Hart." Silence sharpened.
"Hart?" Claire repeated, softer. "Is her father Michael Hart?" "Yes." Daniel touched the pocket where the photograph lay like a small, hot truth. "He left something meant for me." "It points to a safe deposit box on Franklin Street." "I think it's proof. Benefits fraud. Guardianship lies. Maybe worse." Claire didn't waste time. "Listen carefully. You cannot bring her into the station. If Briggs is in, the paperwork will vanish. I'm waking a judge. You go to St. Mary's Urgent Care on Cedar. Dr. Anika Patel is on nights. She's solid. She'll document bruises and lock the door. I'll meet you there with a court order and a lawyer." "Name?" Daniel asked. "Jonah Pierce," she said. "He's a shark with a conscience." "Daniel, can you keep moving?" He glanced at Emily. The girl watched him around Shadow's shoulder, eyes like lantern glass in rain. "I can?" "Then do it. One more thing. If you see Pastor Lowell before me, don't engage. He's thick with Carson and the sheriff, plays benevolent in daylight, and forgets children exist after Sunday." She exhaled. "I'm proud of you for calling Hale." The words slid past his armor and rested against a place in him that had been empty for a long time. "We'll be there," he said, and hung up. He turned, crouching to Emily's height. "We're going to a doctor. She's good. She'll make a record of your hurts so no one can pretend they don't exist. Then my friend will meet us." Emily's mouth pulled tight. "Will they take me away?" He didn't lie. "To safety," he said. "And I will stay close." Shadow will too. Her throat bobbed. The teddy's ear darkened where rain soaked it through. "Okay," she whispered. They cut toward town on back streets, moving like a shadow that carried its own light. Twice Daniel saw taillights idle in cross streets and froze, counting beats until the cars slid on. A hymn drifted thin through rain from somewhere past the square. The edges of the world stank faintly of gas where a station lost its canopy to the wind. St. Mary's rose out of the wet like a yellow rectangle, a low urgent care with a glass door and a bell that probably didn't work. Daniel pushed inside anyway. Warm air wrapped them, antiseptic sting clean and unreal after the woods. A nurse at the counter jerked her head up, eyes flaring from board to surgical in a blink. "Help you?" she began, then saw Emily's face. She stood. "You already did," she said. "Exam 2?" Now Dr. Anika Patel slid in a minute later, brown hair, bun wet, eyes both fierce and kind. She didn't ask stupid questions. She asked the right ones. She never touched Emily without telling her first where and why. When she peeled Emily's sleeve back and saw the fingerprint-shaped bruises, her mouth thinned. When she lifted a hem and saw the darker ringed ones around a skinny ribcage, her jaw worked once. "We're documenting," she said to Daniel, voice like a hard promise. "And we're locking the door." Somewhere in the building, a bolt snicked. A printer rattled into life. Dr. Patel looked to Shadow's wrapped flank next and crouched to eye level. "We'll get you fixed too, brave boy," she murmured, and Shadow wagged his tail once, dignified. Emily watched the doctor's hands. Something unknotted a little in her face. Daniel found the wall, leaned a shoulder to it, and told his lungs to remember they knew how. He pulled the photo partway from his pocket, thumb brushing the edge of three men frozen in sun. Hart's grin. His own two young eyes. The third man, hawk nose, smile that never met the eyes, shadowed the edge like a bad forecast. Who were you? The key clicked against the photo's corner. Franklin Street. Proof, maybe absolution. The door buzzer snapped, buzzy and insistent. Everyone in the room looked at it. Dr. Patel's eyes flicked to the small monitor. Her face changed shape, a tightness at the mouth, a square of thought under the cheekbones. She hit the intercom. St. Mary's Urgent Care. A voice oiled back, amplified by the little speaker. Evening, Doc. Sheriff Briggs. We got a report of a vagrant bringing a dangerous animal into a clinic. Mind letting me in so we can make sure everything's safe for the public? Emily's hand found Shadow's neck and fisted there. The dog's ears pricked, body tall without moving. Daniel slid one step to stand between the girl and the door, the rifle nowhere in sight but the readiness plain as thunder. Dr. Patel kept her finger on the button. We're closed for storm protocol, Sheriff. Come back in the morning. Not how that works, Mum, Briggs drawled, pleasant as rain. Behind his words, a metallic peal of a prying tool kissed the door frame. Open up, or we'll ensure compliance for the safety of all. We don't want nobody getting hurt. A second silhouette joined Briggs on the cameras. Tall, umbrella in hand, pastoral black coat, a white collar square at the throat like a little flag. Pastor Lowell smiled up into the lens and lifted a hand in blessing. The intercom crackled with static, but the words that had already slithered into the room lingered heavier than the storm outside. Sheriff Briggs, Pastor Lowell, together. Their faces loomed pale and distorted on the tiny monitor. Briggs with his politician's grin, Lowell with his sanctified smirk that could sell sin as mercy. Emily squeezed Shadow's ruff so tight her knuckles whitened. The shepherd stood steady though his hackles bristled, a line of instinct and devotion carved in fur. Daniel could feel the tremor in Emily's small frame through the air itself, though she made no sound. Dr. Patel's jaw hardened. She leaned close to Daniel, her voice low. They're not here for safety. If they get through that door, she's gone. Daniel nodded once. We buy time.
Claire Reynolds is coming with a judge's order. The doctor's eyes flicked to Emily. Then we hold until she gets here. The door rattled as a pry bar wedged into the seam. Briggs's voice, falsely genial, floated through the intercom again. Don't make this difficult, Doc. You're interfering with an active custody matter. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this. Pastor Lowell's tone followed, soft as honey, meant to crawl into ears and rot judgment. Doctor, think of the child. She belongs with family. Wouldn't Christ say the same? Emily's lip trembled, and she ducked behind Shadow. He's lying, she whispered. Daniel knelt, eye level with her. You know your truth, he said, voice rough but steady. That's stronger than their lies. Don't forget that he checked the rifle, then slung it back out of immediate sight. He wasn't looking for a firefight, but he also wasn't going to let anyone take Emily without going through him and the shepherd first. Dr. Patel tapped the intercom button, her voice clipped. This facility is closed. Any further attempt to force entry will be considered unlawful. Records are being transmitted. It was a bluff. There was no signal in the storm, but her composure was steel. Briggs laughed. Cute. Kick it in, boys. A heavy shoulder slammed the glass. Cracks spidered across the pane. Emily gasped and buried her face in Shadow's fur. Daniel's chest burned. He knew the rhythm of sieges, the waiting just before the breach. In his head, it was a mud brick compound again, men yelling, RPG smoke in the air. He forced the ghost back down. Shadow, he whispered. The dog looked at him, alert. Guard! Shadow stepped in front of Emily, body tall, ears forward, growl steady. The sound was low thunder, a warning older than words. The door jolted again. Hinges groaned. Daniel looked to Patel. Back hall. Storage, she said quickly. There's a rear exit through supply, but it opens onto the alley if they've got the place surrounded. Better than a bottleneck here, Daniel cut in. Emily tugged his sleeve, eyes wide. What if they catch us? He crouched again, hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching. Then we make sure they don't. Shadow and I won't let go, understand? Her throat bobbed, but she nodded. The door shuddered, a corner breaking free. Rain and shouts spilled in with the smell of wet asphalt. Now, Daniel barked. Patel grabbed the girl's medical notes, stuffed them into a folder, and sprinted down the hall. Emily ran close to Shadow, Daniel covering their flank. The corridor hummed with fluorescent light, walls lined with charts and supply cabinets. Behind them, glass crashed. Boots flooded the lobby. Back! Briggs' roar shook the walls. They burst into supply, Patel yanking open the metal door to the alley. Cold rain slapped them. The alley stretched, narrow between brick buildings, dumpsters lining the walls. The exit sign flickered overhead. Go! Daniel urged. Emily clung to Shadow's side as they dashed through puddles, Patel leading. Daniel covered rear, rifle at low ready. His pulse thudded like mortar fire, but his body moved like muscle memory. Halfway down the alley, figures appeared at the far end, men in slickers blocking escape. Emily froze. Shadow snarled, his body lowering to pounce. Daniel swore under his breath, trapped. But then headlights flared at the mouth of the alley, washing the men in stark light. A horn blared, tires screeched. The SUV that swung into view wasn't black. It was a silver sedan, battered but moving like a weapon in the right hands. The driver's door flung open. A tall woman stepped out, hair pulled back, soaked in the rain, but her eyes alight with fury. Claire Reynolds. "Daniel!" she shouted. "Get them in!" Behind her, a shorter man climbed out, coat flapping, briefcase clutched like a shield. Jonah Pierce, the attorney. Briggs' men hesitated, eyes narrowing at the sight of paperwork and authority cutting through the storm. "Federal injunction!" Pierce shouted, holding a stamped document high. His voice cut clean through the alley. "Any attempt to seize this child without a hearing will constitute kidnapping under state and federal law." Briggs himself stepped into view behind his men, face contorted. "You don't know what you're sticking your neck into, lawyer." Jonah didn't flinch. "Then sue me," he snapped. "Judge Franklin has signed." Guardianship is suspended, pending investigation. Daniel grabbed Emily and ushered her into the back seat of Claire's car. Shadow leapt in after her, shaking rain everywhere. Emily wrapped both arms around the shepherd's neck, eyes squeezed shut. "Go, go, go!" Claire barked, climbing behind the wheel. Daniel slammed the door behind him as Jonah dived into the passenger seat. The sedan peeled out, tires spitting water, Briggs' curses fading into the storm. Inside the car, the heater barely worked, but the air felt like salvation. Emily sat wedged between Shadow and Daniel, her teddy bear clutched, stitches torn but still hers. She looked up at Daniel, her voice a whisper over the engine. "You came back." "You didn't leave." Daniel's throat tightened. He brushed wet hair from her forehead. "Not now." "Not ever." Claire's eyes flicked to him in the mirror. "We've got her safe for now," she said. "But Carson and Briggs won't quit. And if Lowell's involved—" Her voice trailed. Jonah leaned forward. "That safe deposit key you mentioned, whatever's in that box, might be the nail that seals their coffin. Until then, we're buying minutes, not days." Daniel pressed a palm to the pocket where the key rested against the photo. He felt the weight of Hart's gaze across years, the unspoken trust. If anything happens, find Daniel Hale. He will know what to do. Emily leaned against Shadow, exhaustion finally pulling at her eyes. Her whisper rode the hum of the engine as rain streaked past the windows. "Please, don't let them send me back." Daniel's hand rested over hers, steady, certain. "They won't." But even as he said it, headlights flickered in the distance behind them. Too many, too close. The chase wasn't over. Rain braided itself into ropes across the windshield, the wipers fencing and failing. Claire's sedan knifed through standing water, engine protesting. In the back seat, Emily was wedged between Daniel and Shadow, the dog's ribcage a warm metronome against her side. Jonah kept twisting around from the passenger seat to scan the black ribbon of road behind them where headlights pulsed and multiplied like angry, hunting eyes. "They're gaining," he said. Claire didn't blink. "Roundabout ahead." We split. Daniel shook his head. "You'll be their priority if they think you've got the order." "Exactly." Claire's lips pressed thin. "Let them chase paper. You take the kid and the dog, cut south to the river and the old mill road. It'll take you toward Franklin Street if you make town." The word Franklin knocked at the key in Daniel's pocket like a coded knock on a steel door. Box 317. Proof. Heart's last breadcrumb. The roundabout bloomed out of the rain, its central flowerbed a drowned halo. Claire whipped the car left, then without warning jerked hard right into the gas station forecourt that yawned like an empty amphitheater, canopy torn, pumps dead. She braked. "Out!" she snapped. Shadow was already standing. Daniel scooped Emily's small backpack, half a zipper and a frayed strap, and opened his door into a wall of storm. "We'll draw them the other way," Claire said, eyes cutting to his. "Get her to the truth." Jonah pressed a business card into Daniel's palm like a talisman. "Call when you can." "If I don't answer, keep moving." Headlights spilled into the forecourt. Claire slammed her door and shot forward, fishtailing back out to the roundabout. Two black SUVs took the bait, abandoning the alley's tight patience for the open hunger of pursuit. One headlight pair lingered, idling at the curb, unsure. "Go," Daniel breathed, and they did, over the low chain dividing the station from the drainage easement, through grass that lapped at their shins, then down into the gutter where water tugged at ankles like a child who never learned enough. They reached the bike path that paralleled the old mill road, a secret ribbon only locals remembered, and Daniel set a pace calibrated to both Emily's legs and Shadow's bandaged flank. Thunder cracked so close it shoved their bones. Half a mile on, the path grabbed the belly of a weather-beaten bridge that leapt the river with all the confidence of a tired story. The river itself had swollen into a brown juggernaut littered with branches and, God help them, half a picnic table that leapt and jammed and spun before slamming into the pier. The bridge flexed uneasily. Daniel stopped at the foot of the span. The sign that warned of a maximum load had spun sideways in the wind. A sheet of corrugated tin cartwheeled off somewhere and vanished. He could taste rust and memory, the long, slow creak before a roof caves, the one note the world plays when it's about to stop being a room and become a tomb. "Daniel?" Emily's voice was a thin thread. "We have to go." He looked down the path that ran along the riverbank, already a throat of mud. He looked at the opposite bank, where dark trees hunched like witnesses. He looked at Shadow, who stared at the bridge, then at him, then nudged Emily's knee toward the far side with a decisive shove. "Light and fast," Daniel said, voice quiet so it wouldn't echo inside the old fear. "Hands on the rail." No running. If anything shifts, you drop and hold. They went. Boards shrieked. The river roared like enemies he would not name. Halfway across, a high keening cut the storm, the sound of stressed metal deciding it had given enough for one lifetime. "Down!" Daniel barked. All three dropped. A section of decking 2 spans ahead tore loose like a pulled scab and vanished into the river, the gap yawning dark and hungry. Water geysered up through the missing plank, cold and furious. Emily yelped, clinging to the rail. Shadow trembled, not in fear, but in the white-hot wattage of self-control, his claws clicking on old nails. Behind them, an engine note. Tires. Daniel looked over his shoulder. A pickup had edged onto the far end of the bridge, lights off, crawling like a crocodile. The outline of the driver's hat was unmistakable, even in silhouette. Roy Carson. Daniel's heartbeat slowed, then widened, like a river finding floodplain. He turned back. "Keep moving." They crabbed forward, hugging the left beams where the wood still had spine. The gap loomed, 2 feet, then 3, as if the river had taken a bite and savored it. "Shadow," Daniel said quietly. The dog looked at the gap, then Emily, then Daniel, matching the distance with those bright, wary eyes. "Take her across." On my mark, the shepherd lowered, muscles coiling. Daniel hooked his fingers in the back strap of Shadow's harness. "Emily," he said, "wrap your arms around his neck. Tight. When he jumps, you go with him. Don't look down." She looked down anyway, because of course she did, and then up at Daniel with a kind of sick courage. "Okay." "Mark," Shadow launched. For an instant he was all air and force, rain flinging off him like coins. Emily went with him, small hands locking under his chest. They hit the far side with a skidding clatter, claws finding purchase that wasn't there, and then was. Shadow crabbed sideways, keeping himself between her and the void, shepherding her away from the broken edge. Daniel rose to jump, and the pickup behind them gunned, the bridge shuddering. His landing foot clipped a wet beam. He fell hard, sliding, ribs kissing the gap. One leg plunged through, knee slamming the side as the river's fist grabbed his boot and pulled. "Daniel!" Emily screamed. He jammed his forearms against the planks, breath exploding. "This is how men die," said a calm voice he recognized from a night long ago. Not with bullets, with stupid old wood in a storm. He shoved, got his thigh up, and rolled away from the bite. Pain sang down his shin. He sucked the song back under his teeth and rose. The pickup roared forward. Carson's face swam into clarity, lantern-jawed and certain of winning. He rolled the window down as if to say something witty and cruel. And Shadow moved like a thrown knife. The shepherd surged past Emily, teeth bared, and slammed his shoulder into the pickup's front quarter panel. It wasn't weight that did it. It was intent and surprise and slick boards. The truck yawed, tires losing grip. Carson swore, overcorrected. The rear fishtailed. For a second, the truck's back wheels hung over the gap where the decking had peeled away. Then they found wood, squealed, and the truck skidded sideways, lodged at a wicked angle across the span, blocking the path but not falling. A door banged open. Carson jumped out, slipped, caught himself on the mirror. He had a pistol. Of course he did. He raised it toward Emily. Daniel didn't think. He became the shove he had been waiting to give the world since a dusty alley in a different life. He hit Carson low, the shot going wild into rain. They slammed into the truck's flank. Daniel's elbow found the man's wrist. The gun spun into the river. Carson's forehead introduced itself to the mirror with a crack, and he went limp into the brackish guise of a man still moving. "Go!" Daniel barked, bodily shoving the pickup enough to open a wedge on the far side, just wide enough for a child and a dog. Emily squeezed through, Shadow gluing to her knee. Daniel followed, one eye on Carson's slack form, the other on the bridge, listening for the note that meant now we fall. They hit the far bank and ran. Daniel's leg twinged with every step. Shadow's bandage had gone from white to pink. Behind them, the pickup's engine revved like a monster refusing to die. Daniel didn't look back. The bike path spat them into the shadow of the old textile mill, a hulking brick river thing with windows like blind eyes. The mill had been a job for a generation of men who thought calluses were safer than dreams. Now it was a warehouse for drift and secrets. The storm made its own architecture, sheets of water, pylons of wind, an atrium of thunder. Shadow slowed, nose working. He cast left, then right, then fixed on the mill's loading bays, dark mouths with tongues of slick concrete. He sneezed rain out of his nose, then pulled hard. "Track," Daniel said, and the shepherd was already tracking. They slipped through a side gate whose padlock had been cut and returned with a ribbon of duct tape, lazy, ugly, and current. Inside, the mill was a cold cathedral. Forklifts slept like beasts. Pallets rose like altars. The fluorescent lights on motion sensors flickered alive in stuttering rows, then died, unable to commit. Somewhere, a generator coughed. "Daniel," Emily whispered, so small it hurt. "I know this smell." He knew it too. Bleach, oil, wet cardboard, fear. Shadow took them down an aisle, then another, then stopped hard by a cage of chain link where a shipping container hunched, doors banded with ratchet straps. A coil of rope lay like a dead snake. Next to it, a child's hair ribbon, pink once, now the colour of old lungs. Emily touched the ribbon like it might burn her. "He took me here sometimes," she said, voice flat from going someplace far inside, to find the courage to speak. "When he said we had to be sorry." Beyond the container, voices, a laugh, a scrape of metal, the echoing bounce of a dropped bolt. Words blurred by corrugated iron, but unmistakable in their shapes. "Pastor says the judge will be at the retreat, no paper till Monday. Briggs can sit on the warrant if it exists. They put her in the van when the river drops." Emily pressed herself against Shadow, and the dog draped his body along her shins like a living barricade. Daniel's hand found the key in his pocket, and then the photo and the other man's face, the hawk nose, the not-quite smile, ghosted up from memory and sat at the edge of the immediate like someone clearing their throat to speak. "Which of you sold us the day we needed buying?" he thought at the frozen face, then pushed the thought away. Time for ghosts later. Now was bolts and bone. He scanned the container's doors, ratchet straps, padlock, a bolt cutter mark on the hasp, used recently, and replaced with a cheaper lock. He could open it in 10 seconds if no one noticed. No one would notice if the generator died and the whole back half of the floor went dark. Thunder stepped down with the patience of a giant. The lights hiccuped. Daniel turned to Emily, crouched low, his voice the hush of a tent at 0300. "Do you remember what you told me about your dad, about listening for footsteps?" She nodded, a wet shine in her eyes. "Good ones. You'll hear mine. If something happens, you do not run unless Shadow pushes you. If he pushes, you run to where there's light and people. Scream my name. What if they hear?" she asked. "Make them," he said. "Make the whole town hear you." He rose, moved to the panel where the generator's ill hum vibrated through sheet metal, and found the emergency shut off with the surety of a man who had spent too much time finding ways to turn machines quiet. He pulled. The world took a long, shocked breath and exhaled. Black Shadow's breathing was the first sound that made sense. Then came the shouts, the angry clatter of men surprised and clumsy in dark. Daniel sprinted for the container, fingers already counting the teeth of the ratchet strap, the give in the lock, the angle that would pop the hasp without screaming metal. He slid the bolt cutter's jaws, stolen off a wall rack in the blackout, around the lock and squeezed. It popped like a knuckle. "Daniel?" Emily whispered. Somewhere near his shin, small fingers brushed his pant leg, anchoring. "It's me," he breathed. Back a step. He peeled the second strap free. The door sighed on old hinges. Inside, a lantern's peepers of light winked from beneath a blanket. A shape moved, small and quick. Emily, no, not Emily. A mirror. Another child. He blinked, heart lurching. A small voice from inside the dark. "Daddy said you were real." Daniel reached. "Come here." Something cold pressed into the scruff of his neck. The click of a hammer being thumbed back is a universal, borderless language. He froze. Pastor Lowell's breath threaded past his ear, sacramental, sour. "Let's not turn off the lights God gave us, son," he murmured. "Step away nice and slow and maybe we all go home blessed." Shadow's growl unspooled in the dark, like a tripwire tightening. "Easy," Sheriff Briggs said from somewhere to Daniel's left, as the generator coughed back to a flicker of red emergency light that made the world a stained glass hell. "There's a lot of love in this room. Wouldn't want it to spill." Emily's hand found Daniel's, small and shaking, and she said, in a voice that somehow carried through everything, "Daddy said if it ever got dark, like this, you'd bring the light." Lowell's gun dug harder into Daniel's neck. "Amen," the pastor said softly. "Let's see." The red emergency light bled through the mill, painting the walls like a wound. Pastor Lowell's breath warmed the back of Daniel's neck, the cold iron of the pistol pressing deeper into his skin. Sheriff Briggs stood to his left, badge glinting faintly under the flicker, his grin stretched too wide, his eyes too flat. Emily clung to Shadow's neck, her little fingers tangled in the dog's damp fur. The shepherd's growl poured low and steady, vibrating against her palms, his body poised like a drawn bow. Inside the container, the blanket stirred again. A tiny face peeked out, hollow cheeks, wide eyes. Another child, a boy no older than 5. His lips parted, and his voice was barely a ghost. "Daddy said you'd come?" Daniel's throat tightened. Hart, his teammate. He had never stopped leaving breadcrumbs. How many children had they locked away? Lowell's whisper slithered down Daniel's spine. "Step away, soldier." "This isn't your war. This is family business, God's business." Daniel's chest ached with memory. Another man, another war, a rifle, pressed to his back in a filthy alley. But this time there was no platoon, no sergeant to pull him out. Only a child's whisper and a dog's steady breathing. He let his voice drop, gravel soft. "You've already lost." Briggs chuckled, stepping closer. "Funny, from where I'm standing, you're the one with a gun to your head." But Briggs had forgotten Shadow. The shepherd's growl changed pitch, low to sharp, and in a blink he launched, slamming into Lowell's arm with the precision of training and the desperation of love. The pistol cracked, muzzle flaring past Daniel's ear, the round digging into brick. Lowell shrieked, toppling back, the gun skittering across the floor. Daniel spun, driving an elbow into the pastor's chest, then tackled Briggs in the same motion. The sheriff's grin faltered as Daniel's shoulder hit his gut, the two men sprawling into the cage of pallets. "Emily, down!" Daniel barked. The girl flattened to the floor, Shadow curling over her, the shepherd's teeth flashing as he planted himself between her and the chaos. Briggs rolled, a knife flashing in his hand. Daniel's pulse surged, the blade glinting like every nightmare he had ever failed to forget. But he met it head-on, catching Briggs's wrist in a lock and twisting until the knife clattered free. Lowell staggered up, clutching his arm. "Stop him! Stop him!" His voice cracked, more shrill than holy now. One of the men from earlier rushed forward, crowbar raised. Daniel kicked a pallet hard, sending it crashing into the man's legs. The crowbar flew, bouncing across the floor, and the man went down with a howl. Briggs slammed his forehead into Daniel's temple, stars bursting across his vision. "You're nothing but a broken vet," Briggs spat. "You think saving one kid changes anything? The system eats men like you." Daniel's vision cleared just enough to see Emily's face, tear-streaked, terrified, but watching him with an intensity that cut through the storm of violence. Her whisper from before echoed in his skull. "Please don't leave me." He snarled, something primal ripping from his chest. Not this time. He heaved, throwing Briggs off balance, then brought the butt of his rifle up in a brutal arc. It cracked across the sheriff's jaw, dropping him limp to the floor. Lowell froze, his breath ragged, the holy facade cracked wide open. "You don't know what you're meddling in," he hissed. "Hart was one of us. He knew the order, the sacrifices. That's why he left you the key. It wasn't for justice. It was for us." Daniel's stomach clenched. He looked at the boy in the container, then at Emily. Lies wrapped in scripture, in small-town complicity. But he knew Hart, knew the man's laugh, the way he carried his team on his shoulders. "No," Daniel said, voice steady, iron. "He left it to make sure you never touched his daughter again." Shadow snarled, stepping toward the pastor. Lowell stumbled back, hand raised. "You'll damn yourself, soldier. Already been there." Daniel cut him off. He grabbed Lowell by the collar and shoved him hard into the chain link, the impact ringing out like a bell. The pastor slumped, unconscious, the piety gone from his face. The warehouse fell silent, except for the storm hammering the roof and the quick breaths of children. Emily crept from Shadow's protection, her teddy bear dangling, stitches torn open. She looked at the boy, still huddled in the container. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're not lost anymore." The boy's eyes widened, and he crawled out, clutching Emily's hand. Daniel knelt, gathering both children close. "We're leaving," he said, his voice gentler now. He looked to Shadow. The shepherd's ears flicked, body bloodied but unbroken. Daniel reached out, pressing his forehead briefly against the dog's. "One last push, buddy." Sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones this time, not the false calls of Briggs' men. Claire, Jonah, reinforcements. The truth was finally catching up. Emily lifted her teddy, the photo and key still tucked safe in its belly. Her eyes locked on Daniel. "Daddy said you'd bring the light." Daniel swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he answered, "We'll make sure it never goes dark again." But even as relief stirred, the storm screamed louder and the warehouse groaned. Floodwater battered its foundations. A collapse was coming. Daniel swept Emily and the boy into his arms, shadows circling to cover. The sirens were closer, hope was real, but the walls themselves were turning traitor. The final fight wasn't finished yet. The warehouse trembled under the storm's wrath, every sheet of rusted metal groaning as the swollen river beat at its foundation. Rain sluiced through cracks in the roof, pooling across the concrete floor. Pallets shifted, forklifts groaned against chains, and the shipping container rattled as if it too wanted to flee. Daniel tightened his grip on Emily and the rescued boy, their small bodies clinging to him like lifelines. Shadow limped close at his side, blood seeping through his bandage, his eyes steady and unflinching. "Move!" Daniel barked to himself as much as to them. He navigated through the aisles of pallets toward the far exit, boots splashing in water that crept higher with every heartbeat. Behind them, Briggs stirred, his jaw swollen, his badge bent sideways on his chest. He pushed himself upright, fury burning through pain. "You think you've won, Hale?" he shouted, voice ragged. "You don't understand how deep this runs. The town is ours. The system is ours. You can't take her." Daniel didn't waste words. He shifted the children into one arm, raised his rifle with the other, and fired a warning shot that shattered the hanging light above Briggs's head. Sparks rained down, sizzling in the floodwater. The sheriff stumbled back, curses lost in thunder. A loud crack split the air, steel giving way. One of the support beams groaned, then snapped, dropping half a stack of pallets into the rising water. The splash hit like a tidal wave. The warehouse was dying. "Daniel!" Emily's small voice trembled against his neck. "The roof!" He looked up, just as the corrugated metal above them peeled back, torn by wind. Rain poured in, a torrent that blinded and battered. The only light was lightning, the storm itself illuminating their path. Shadow barked once, sharp, urgent, then bolted toward a side door half hidden behind crates. He pressed his weight against it, claws scrabbling at the seam. Daniel followed, lungs burning. He set the kids down just long enough to shove the door with his shoulder. Rust screamed, but the hinges gave, the door flying open into the night. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the wail of approaching sirens. "Freedom!" "Go!" Daniel urged, pushing Emily and the boy through first. Shadow herded them, his body a living wall until they were all outside. The warehouse groaned behind them, then collapsed inward with a roar, sending a geyser of water and debris into the sky. Daniel shielded the children as sparks and metal rained down. When the noise finally faded, only silence and rain remained. Red and blue lights cut through the storm. Police cruisers and emergency vehicles skidded to a halt on the flooded mill road. Claire Reynolds jumped from her car, her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes blazing. Jonah was right behind her, papers clutched in his hand like a weapon. "Daniel!" Claire shouted, sprinting toward them. She dropped to her knees beside Emily, wrapping her arms around the girl in fierce relief. "You're safe now." "You're safe." Emily clung to her but turned, her gaze finding Daniel. "We didn't leave," she whispered, as though testing if the promise still held. Daniel crouched, cupping her shoulder gently. His voice shook, but it was steady enough for her. "And we never will." Paramedics rushed forward, taking the boy, checking Shadow's wound, urging Daniel to sit. He waved them off until the children were secured in blankets. Only then did he allow his own body to sag, exhaustion carving into his bones. Briggs was dragged out of the ruins by 2 state officers, his face pale, his badge torn away. Lowell was hauled in handcuffs, muttering scripture that no longer carried weight. Their empire of silence had cracked wide open under the storm. Jonah stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority as he handed the signed injunction to the lead officer. Custody suspended. Immediate protective care. And charges, plenty of charges? Claire's eyes softened as she looked at Daniel. You did it. You got her here. You brought the truth. Daniel shook his head faintly. His gaze moved to Emily, who now sat wrapped in a blanket, Shadow's head heavy on her lap, the boy leaning against her side. No, Daniel said quietly. We did. The paramedics tried to coax Emily into an ambulance, but she dug her heels in, eyes wide with fear of separation. Daniel stepped close, offering his hand. I'll ride with you, he promised. Only then did she nod, her tiny hand slipping into his, fragile but fierce. Hours later, the storm had broken. Dawn painted the horizon with faint gold. In a quiet room at St. Mary's, the children slept on cots, their chests rising and falling in peace for the first time in years. Shadow lay at Emily's feet, stitches cleaned, his breathing slow and steady. Daniel stood at the window, rain drying on his jacket, staring at the horizon. The key and the photograph lay on the table, tangible proof of a legacy, of betrayal, of truth that could no longer be buried. Claire stepped beside him, her voice soft. The judge will grant custody. You know that, don't you? With what we've uncovered, Carson and Briggs will never touch her again. Daniel exhaled, heavy but lighter than before. It's not just about custody. It's about making sure the silence ends, Claire nodded. And you've already started that. Behind them a small voice stirred. Emily sat up, rubbing her eyes, clutching her teddy bear. The stitches were still torn, but inside it now lived proof of her father's honor. She looked at Daniel, her voice a whisper, meant for him alone. I'm not lost anymore? Daniel swallowed hard, the words hitting deeper than any battlefield memory ever had. He crossed the room, knelt beside her cot, and brushed damp hair from her face. No, he said softly. You're home. Shadow thumped his tail once, a quiet punctuation to the vow. Emily leaned against him, her small body finally at rest, and for the first time since the war, Daniel felt the faint stirrings of peace. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because he had chosen to walk forward with the living. And in that quiet dawn, under the watch of a loyal dog and a child's fragile hope, redemption finally felt within reach.